What's going on, guys? So I got Morgan here. I decided to do something I seen Chris Willem do over on the One Shot group, and that is give you an overview of a game. And what is my computer doing here already? Goofing up. All right, screw that. Anyway, what he did was he took and made a video about Dungeon World, told you how the game ran, how it worked, what he liked about it, and basically gave everybody a solid foundation to go off of if they decided they want to play a game of Dungeon World. And that is basically what I'm going to be doing here. I have a video, or event up on the One Shot group for a game that I'm doing called Crimson and Clover. Now, I'm going to be using an Apocalypse World hack for this game, and by that I mean I will be using the same engine as Apocalypse World and Dungeon World, which is 2 dice 6 plus whatever the attribute or skill might be, and you use those to come up with your success, your partial success, or your failure. And I'm going to be doing the exact same thing, but the reason it is a hack is I won't be following the actual guidelines of Apocalypse World or Dungeon World for that matter. And it's kind of a mix between, say, Stars Without Numbers or Eclipse Phase, maybe, combined with Apocalypse World, where we have a simple system, but we also have a skill-based system that gives a lot more variety and a lot more character to your PCs, or a lot more options, I guess you would say. You can create almost anything you would want to in this. So I will actually link over to Chris's video about Dungeon World. I'm not going to go through all of the basics like he did of how to play the system, because the game we're going to be doing here is called Apocalyptic Stars, and it runs the same exact way. It works the same way as far as having the narrative first and pushing the story along with the roles. There are a few differences, for example, in Apocalyptic Stars, there is a skill-based system, and not there. You don't have attributes like strength, intelligence, dexterity, stuff like that. There are no attributes. Apocalypse World itself has like body and mind, spirit, stuff like that, and this doesn't have any of that kind of crap either. It just has a straight-up skill system. So yeah, you can see here on the screen, I got the introduction to what the game is. And it says Apocalyptic Stars is a rule-like twist on the popular Apocalypse World engine. You don't need to be familiar with those games because they're very simple and very quick to play. Like Chris says, as well as anywhere you read about any of these kind of systems, then it's all about the narrative. You don't stop to roll initiative. You don't stop to take turns during combat. So you can see the introduction there and read that if you want, but roll checks you can see over here. Oh, why is that doing that? Oh, well, so 10 is a total success, 10 or more. 7 to 9 is a partial success, and a 6 or minus is a failure. So a total success means that whatever it is you set out to do, you accomplished it, and the story moves forward. A partial success means you did what you needed to do, but there's a catch. Maybe you took damage if it's something like that, or maybe you broke the object you were trying to fix after you used it, or you got what you wanted done, but there's a consequence of some sort usually, or it wasn't as good as you wanted to. And the result of 6 or minus is a failure with consequences. Now note that it says that there's a failure with consequences. That doesn't mean that when you attack you miss. There's no whiffing. You don't just roll, miss, and move on. No, there's something that goes with it. So if you attack, for example, this is true in Dungeon World. If you went up and you attacked, you would miss the attack, but they get an attack back on you. So the DM would take his position and tell what happens with the story, and then move it on to the next scene. If you are trying to climb up a cliffside, you don't just get a miss and you don't just stop moving up the cliffside or something. No, I would introduce some sort of consequence or something to happen. It might be so simple as you slip and fall, or it could be you still make it up a little bit on the wall that you're climbing, but somebody has spotted you and starts shooting at you with a bow and arrow. Or, in this game, maybe they start shooting at you with a laser gun or something. So the roll checks are really there to push the story forward. As a player, you will never be going around saying, okay, I am going to make a firearms check. You don't do it that way. Rather, you tell the GM what you want to do. You could say, Morgan steps up to the plate, he pulls his sights on his target of some sort, and he pulls the trigger. You could do it a whole lot more in depth than that, but just as a simple example, that tells the GM what your character is doing, And with that, the GM will say, okay, well, it sounds like you're making a firearms check. Go ahead and roll plus firearms. And so you'll take your 2d6, you roll, you add in whatever your firearms attribute is, and that gives you your total. So roll checks are very simple. I mean, as a player, you really don't need to keep track of very much for your rolls because the GM is going to be telling you what to roll when. You just simply tell the story as what your character is doing and go with everything else. Let's see, combat and actions, and this kind of goes into what I was just saying, but there are no actual combat actions. You don't attack with your sword, you don't shoot, you don't move your 30 feet or your 6 spaces, you don't flank. There is none of those type of things. There is no initiative order. I won't be having people roll initiative and going down taking turns. Instead, everybody be moving and talking, telling the story as one, back and forth. I'll hop between players, as a GM, saying, okay, John, what are you doing? Okay, Chris, what are you doing? And moving between them. But I don't actually follow any sort of initiative order. I move between who's doing stuff and how that fits within the narrative. If I know 2 characters are attacking, this robot over here, I'll ask them to go first, see what they're doing, play that out, and then I might hop over to the other scene where one of the players are trying to fix the computer board, see how that's going, and then I might hop back over to the 2 combat scene, and then after that maybe move on to something else where somebody else is doing something else before I can get back to it. So I move around depending on the scene. Think of it like a movie, They might show the combat going on in one scene, but they also will stop that combat scene to move over to another scene while that's still going on. And that's exactly how this works. It works that way in Apocalypse World, any of the other hacks or Dungeon World. And, like I said, 9 times out of 10, it says on here, but you will probably know what you need to roll. Like if you're taking aim and you're getting ready to shoot somebody, 9 times out of 10, you're going to know that that's going to require a firearms roll, but you don't tell the GM, I'm going to make a firearms roll. Instead, you tell what you're doing, and the GM will say, okay, well, he's not even paying attention to you, so you hit automatically. Okay. Other times, I'm going to say, well, he's quite wary and he's taking cover behind some boxes, so roll firearms -1. So, he'll add in attributes and he'll add in penalties and bonuses or automatic hits depending on how the narrative is. Okay, so here's the big things where this game deviates from like Dungeon World and Apocalypse World. The first is damage. Weapons are listed with a number followed by either an H or an L. Everything in this game runs off of a die 6, so you just need a handful of die 6s to play. If you have a pistol, for example, and it says the damage is 3L, that means you roll 3 die 6 and you take the lowest value. L stands for lowest. If the damage says 4H, you would roll 4 die 6 and take the highest damage. The H stands for highest. Okay? So, if you have 4H is your damage and you roll a 2, 2, 3, and a 6. 6 is the highest value on your 4H, so that's the damage. And if it said like a 3L, you would roll your 3 dice, so you get a 1, 2, and a 3. 1 is the lowest value on your 3L roll, so 1 is the damage. Okay. Now, the only really tricky part that I'll say this game has is exploding dice. Now, there's quite a few games out there that have exploding dice. If you're not familiar with it, it essentially means that when you roll a certain number on those dice, you get to re-roll them again. But every roll keeps adding on to the last one until you stop having to roll. So, in Apocalyptic Stars, 6s are an exploding dice for combat damage only. You don't count them for your your skill rolls or nothing, only for damage. So, exploding dice only for damage, remember that. And what it is when you roll a 6, you will get to re-roll that 6. It doesn't matter if you're rolling 4L or 4H or 10H or anything else. You always re-roll your 6s onto the next explosion. So, some of the examples I have in here is, for example, a laser pistol that deals 3H. Okay? Then if you roll a 2, 2, and a 5, you had your 3H. So, that means your 3 dice 6 take the highest number. In that case, it's a 5, so it's 5 damage. But let's say we rolled a 2, a 6, and a 6, right? Those 6s are going to explode. The highest value on your 3H here is a 6. So you'd mark down, you've done 6 damage already. You pick up those 2d6s and you re-roll them. Okay, and then let's say with those 2 re-rolls, you get, what do they have on here? You get a 4 and a 5. You still keep the H signature so that you know you take the highest. In this case, it's 5. And in the end, you dealt 6 with the first explosion, 5 with the second explosion, for a total of 11 damage. I know it's kind of crazy to wrap your head around at first, but it's pretty simple once you actually do it a few times. Okay, now it works the same exact way with low rolls. So, what's the example I got in here? It says 4L, so you're going to roll 4 dice 6 and take the lowest number. And let's say we roll a 2, 2, 5, and a 6. The lowest number is a 2, so you go ahead, you mark that 2 down. You've already done 2 damage on this first explosion. And note that every time you roll damage dice, that is an explosion. So even if you roll just once, that's your first explosion. Your second time would be your second explosion, so on and so forth. So, with this first explosion, the lowest value is a 2. You mark that down, you've done 2 damage so far. But you also have a 6 in there, so you grab your 6 and you re-roll it. Let's say that time you roll a 2. You add that 2 to the one that was before, and you got 4 damage altogether. But let's say you rolled a 6 on that second explosion. So the first explosion, you had a 2, 2, 5, and a 6, right? You took 2 as your lowest number. You picked up your 6 that you rolled because it exploded, and you roll it again, and you get a 6. You take that 6, and that adds into your 2 from the first explosion, so now you're up to 8 damage, and you roll it again. So you pick it up, and you roll it again, and this time, say you get 4. You would add that into your initial damage, and that would be it. In theory, you could keep rolling 6s and 6s and do a mass amount of damage. Obviously the statistics are against you, and you're not going to go that way, but as long as you're rolling 6s, you get to keep rolling them, and you get to keep adding those values into your damage. A natural 6 always explodes in combat, just remember that. So no matter if it's a 4 high or a 3 low or a 12 high or anything else, all those 6s you pick up and you re-roll. And really, for each explosion, you got to keep in mind that you're only taking 1 die out of either the highest or the lowest, so you can just keep setting those aside and rolling more for your explosions each time. Just as an easy way to, remember it. For the vitals in this game, there's both health and sanity. It does pull. It's designed as a sort of Cthulhu-esque kind of game. It can go in that direction, but it doesn't have to. So sanity is in there for that, but it could also be, just your basic sanity of dealing with horrors if you wanted to go that route. Or it might be, like cybernetics melting away your brain or something. There's tons of different things it could work with. But either way, if your health or your sanity falls to 0, well, actually, if it falls below 0, you're dead. Either your character is dead from health, or he's just completely insane and, not playable anymore. If it's at 0, then they're either unconscious or they're in like a mental shock. They're going to have to be healed or, brought out of this mental shock somehow in the medical centers. So, that's this game in a nutshell. We're going to move down so you can check out a character sheet so you can get an idea what's going on. In this case, this is going to be for the Crimson and Clover game that I'm setting up. This guy is a former detective. I didn't put in any name. That's for the player to do. Race, human. They describe how he looks. His health's 16. His sanity's 19. He has 2 armor. Armor in this game protects for damage. So if he takes 4 points of damage from getting shot or something, the armor absorbs 2 of it. So he ends up only taking 2 points of damage. Shows his different gear that he has along with what it does. So his protective code is what gives him the 2 armor. His hidden blade deals 1L damage. So that's 1 die 6. Take the lowest value. Obviously, whatever you roll is going to be the lowest in that case. His handgun does 2-8. His small rifle does 3-8. He has bullets to keep track of. Now he has heat-seeking ammo. This adds a +1 when he attacks with his heat-seeking ammo, which would end up going into his firearms more than likely. He's got his comms pad, his old cop badge, pack of cigs. Okay, a micromite, just, you would know this when you're playing the game, but essentially it's like a tiny little stick of dynamite about the size of a cigarette. Then you see all the different skills that this guy has, okay? All the players have the same skill set, but they have different points in different areas. So you have your basic animal handling, that would be his using horses and stuff like that. Arts, athletics would be your physical running, jumping, stuff like that. Brawling is hand-to-hand combat, monks, martial arts, stuff like that. Crafts could be anything from making a quilt to making a pipe bomb. Driving is for street-based vehicles. Your field cred is sort of like your ranking in the military, you're in a police force, or your ranking on the streets, I guess, if you want to do it. Firearms is for personal firearms, pistols, rifles, so on. Your fortitude is your health, essentially. Gunnery is for big guns, like cannons and, like machine gun turrets on cars, stuff like that. History, intimidation, most of these are pretty self-explanatory. Lore has come in. This would be like where when you get into more Cthulhu-esque sort of things, so it kind of your philosophical lore, religious lore, stuff like that. Mechanics is just straight up mechanics. Medicine, melee. This is for when you have a melee-based weapon, a sword, a knife, a club, stuff like that. So it's different from brawling. See, negotiation, performance, piloting could be for your spacecrafts, airplanes, so on and so forth. Psionics, this game does have psionics. The camp, this little adventure that I'm doing is not going to be using it at all, but it does have it. Scavenging. I think everything else here is pretty self-explanatory. Tracking power. So I'll get to the moves in a second. Every character has this little questionnaire thingy that a person can, circle whatever one fits on each line, and that will give them a little bit of a basis to their character for when they start playing, and it'll allow me as a GM or anybody else that runs it to kind of like work them into the story. So, if this guy, maybe he was a corrupt cop, he has a shoot first and ask later sort of attitude, he wants to get revenge on maybe it's whoever kicked him out of the police force or something, and one of the people knows that he's a corrupt cop because that's a secret. So, it gives them a little basis to start with, and they can jump right in and start playing. Moves are like special things that each character has. Now, even though in my case, I'm going to have everybody's character sheet and can look at it, I'm not always going to remember that somebody has something like interrogate, this guy. So, and for this one it says, when you ask a question to someone who was locked up, tied up, or otherwise at your mercy, roll plus intimidation. Now, normally, if you were playing and you had, some gang guy tied up and you were interrogating him stuff, I'd ask you to roll intimidation if that's how, you were playing out the scene. As a player, let me know or let the GM know that you do have this move. This is one of the rare occasions where you can say, hey, I have this move that I'm going to use, basically. You shouldn't put it in that way, but you give the GM a reminder that you have this. Otherwise, they're going to end up defaulting over to using your rank or your skills and playing it in that fashion. Whereas this one actually gives you, a certain ability on, in this case on 10 plus, they answer your question truthfully, and you can choose 3 of these down here that fit. So be sure that your GM knows that you have a move when you go to use it. If it's, playing something for a long time, or the GM is familiar with what's going on and your characters and everything, they'll probably remember. But, I'm just thinking from my standpoint and doing the one-shots, there's going to be a lot of different characters coming in and out. I'm not always going to remember who has what. And, I'm focusing on the skills and running the game, not what your character can do. That's up to you guys. So, while I'm always, totally for keeping with the narrative and keeping the story flowing and not, hopping out of game to say what you have, this is one of those cases where you kind of need to. So yeah, you can read those. All different moves. I'm going to have this PDF attached to my game thing so people can look at it. The other one is a hired muscle mutant, basically just your big brute. We have a techno junkie who's essentially a hacker, can get into different things. And then we have the preacher. He's sort of like a machine gun preacher. He's good at his firearms. He's particularly, excels at. He has unbreakable will. Survivor. He's just like your machine gun preacher, really, but he still has his philosophy of his faiths and following the Lord and stuff like that. So, it's definitely could be an in-depth character who's carrying around a machine gun and killing people. You justify that because that's your character. So, yeah, that's this game in a nutshell, guys.